revise and extend later, I guess we can.
Right. I thought about sharing with you the kind of script that I came up with. I can actually, to give you an idea, I can sketch out what's in the script. But the reason I didn't do that was the instructions I've read said not to. That maybe this would be too restrictive. So I was following the directions that I had.
That's fine. That's fine. I just hope I can. I just hope my memory doesn't fail me too badly on some of these things.
Well, we'll take it slow and we'll take it easy. But let me ask you this: Are you seeing me, or are you seeing a blank?
I'm seeing a very small circular photo of you in the beginning in the middle of a blank screen.
That's what I'm seeing too. I think my video is off. There
you are. There you are.
This is a completely different interface than I'm used to. Perfect. All right. Everything is looking correct now. We are recording. So I'll just sketch out what the script is about. All right. So we're going to start off with just background and learn about you, right, and just get comfortable. Then we're going to go into kind of the history of the Computation Center and CS, and that will go from there into talking about the types of research that were happening.
Okay.
And the recreational part, right? So sure. I'm picturing that as being, maybe 2/3, right? Before we even talk about the game. And maybe the last third, we'll talk about the game just to get the history nailed down. But really the first 2/3 are about the history. So this is, for me, this is really not so much about the game, it's about getting the history. So,
okay. Which is fine, because as far as the game is concerned, I was a bystander.
Right.
I was not. I may have played, a couple or three times, but I was not a gamer in that sense.
That's exactly my picture. And the funny thing is, I'm not a gamer either. So we're in the same boat. But yeah, I got to play a little bit down in San Marcos, so it has a special place in my heart, but I'm not a gamer. So we have important history topics to go into. So I think we're almost ready, but let's start by saying, as an introduction, that we're getting an oral history interview with Clive Dawson. This is July 15, 2026. And Clive, we would like to confirm again with verbal consent that you agree that this becomes public, and this recording will be open for public use.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. We're going to start with just warming up and learning about your background. So Clive, I know that you've mentioned speaking Spanish, and I'm very intrigued to learn about where you came from, your family, where you grew up.
Sure. I'll give you a brief history, and feel free to cut me off if I get into the weeds too much. I was born in Mexico City, Mexico. My family basically were expatriates, born and lived in Mexico for many years. My grandfather originally moved to Mexico from Chicago in 1902. The president of Mexico at the time decided that he wanted all of the public buildings and the cathedral in Mexico City decorated with colored lights for the holidays. And he hired an electric firm from Chicago to come and do the job. My grandfather worked for them, so he and his crew came down to Mexico by train and worked on the lighting project, which was challenging because colored lights had not been invented yet, and they had a lot of false starts trying to figure out how to do these colored lights without them melting or exploding from the heat and so on. But anyway, they finally got it done, and it was a great success. And then he went back to Chicago and arrived in the winter of 1903, 1904, which was the worst winter that Chicago had had in the last 50 years. It was sub-zero weather. There was snow, like 20 inches of snow. He took one look at what he had returned to and decided, what in the heck am I doing here? And he turned around and went right back to Mexico, set up an electric shop downtown Mexico City, and eventually married. And my mom was born, and she worked for the U.S. Embassy, met my dad, and the rest is history. I went to the American School in Mexico City, which is the school that she had attended. In fact, I had several of her same teachers, and didn't come up to the U.S. until I graduated from high school, at which point I went to college up at Stevens Institute of Technology. I had been there the previous year as part of a National Science Foundation summer science training program for high schoolers. And I thought that, being right across from New York City on a wonderful campus with a fantastic view of the city was great. And I liked the place, so I applied, and that's where I ended up.
The Stevens Institute, is this in New York City itself?
No, it is in Hoboken, New Jersey.
New Jersey?
On the Hudson River, just across from Manhattan. And one parenthetical story, Stevens was short of dormitory space. So they actually bought an ocean liner that had been in use back in the 40s and 50s as one of the transatlantic passenger ships. They anchored it on the Hudson adjacent to the campus, and I lived aboard a ship for 3 years, from 1968 to 1971. Those were precisely the years when the World Trade Center was under construction. And so I would look out my porthole every morning, and I could see that thing as it rose from nothing to its full height of 102 or 110 stories, whatever it was. And of course, 30 years later, I watched it come down in 15 seconds. That was a very traumatic experience for me and for all the Stevens people. So anyway.
Your family, were they affected by the Mexican Revolution? Just curious, going back to like the
yes,
20...
As a matter of fact, they were. I mentioned that my grandfather started an electric shop downtown Mexico City. Next door to him was an apartment building where a French family lived who ran a dry cleaning business. And they had a little daughter who was about 5 years old. My grandfather was in his 20s at the time, mid-20s. And they had a little girl about 5 or 6 years old that he would just see coming and going from the next door apartment. When the Mexican Revolution started in 1910, the family decided that it was too dangerous for their daughters to live in the middle of all of this. And so they sent them up to Texas, to San Antonio, and they went to school at Our Lady of the Lake in San Antonio, Texas. It was a parochial school, and they went to high school, middle school, junior high and high school there. By the time that they returned to Mexico after that, she was a very nice looking young lady. And my grandfather started courting her, even though there was about a 20-year age difference. which I guess at that time wasn't all that uncommon. And so they ended up getting married. And then, like I say, my mom and my uncle were born and so on. So that was, and the Mexican president who wanted to do the lighting project was Porfirio Diaz, who is considered by many to be a dictator. It was amazing who you talked to, because if you talked to the Americans in Mexico, they thought he was the best thing there ever. He was very sympathetic to foreign investment and all of that. And, history was later revised because, he didn't really treat the landowners and the peasants very well, like the farmers and so on. So, two sides to every story.
Understood. Yes. Clive, do you have Mexican citizenship?
I do, as a matter of fact. I had Mexican citizenship by virtue of being born in Mexico. My mother had American citizenship, but as it turns out, one of the U.S. rules is that citizenship doesn't pass down to the child unless the parent has actually lived in the U.S. for a certain amount of time, which my mom never did. And therefore, I did not automatically obtain American citizenship. This, of course, is a very hot topic nowadays with the birthright citizenship and so on and so forth. And I was perfectly happy to keep my Mexican citizenship because at the time when I came up here, it was 1967. The draft lottery had just been conducted. My number was too low for comfort. And I thought, you know what? My home country is fine for me. I have a sentimental attachment to it, so I will just stay Mexican. And I came up on a student visa, but my graduate school career was extended by several years because I was having so much fun with the DEC-10 in Texas. And when I got married in 1978, is when I first got my green card by virtue of the fact that my wife, quote unquote, sponsored me.
Okay.
Fast forward to 2001, 9/11 comes along again. As I mentioned, this was a trauma for me. And I decided then that I had been a guest in this country long enough. And so I got my U.S. citizenship at that time.
Okay.
And I'm now a U.S. citizen.
Nice. Great story. So you've already mentioned actually a little bit that the question is, how did you arrive at UT? It was for grad school, right?
Right. I graduated from Stevens in 71, started at the University of Texas in the fall of 71.
How did you make that choice? How did you choose to go to UT?
I had visited, so my parents had come up from Mexico City to San Antonio for spring break, and I met them down there. My sister came down from a college in Minnesota, so it was a little mini family reunion in the spring of 1970 in San Antonio. And I was starting to think about grad schools. I had my eye on Stanford, and I was already firmly convinced that I was going to be studying artificial intelligence, and so I had my eye on MIT and Stanford. But here I was 70 miles away from Austin, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to run up there and interview with, just take a look at the UT campus. And of course, it was spring break, so there was nobody around. And a professor had to come in from home to meet me on campus and quote unquote interview me for grad school. And not only, I mean, he was very impressed with me, and he offered me a full scholarship right on the spot. And so, you know, and the campus was great. It was close to Mexico. That was essentially what made the decision for me.
Beautiful. This is a great story. This is 71.
Right.
You were looking at Stanford and MIT.
Yeah.
You decided to come to UT. What was it like when you arrived? What neighborhood were you living in, and what was your first experience at UT?
I moved into a dormitory. I didn't know anything other than dormitories at that time. I mean, I'd lived my entire time in at Stevens in a dorm, the ship, and so there was this gigantic dorm on UT campus called Jester, and they had when I first came, they did not have a graduate student floor, so I was. Let's see, I guess my first roommate was a Korean grad student, and then there was a guy from Arizona State who was also a grad student. Anyway, eventually they had the top floor dedicated to grad students, and I stayed at Jester for, I think, a total of 3 years before moving out and going into an apartment in the campus area.
Okay. Do you remember? Were you north of campus when you moved off campus? Did you move up north of campus?
Yeah. My first address was the Villa Arcos apartment on 3301 Speedway. Then the next one, and this was after. By then I had met my wife to be. She was a grad student as well in sociology, and we met at Jester. Of course, we like to say, here's another parenthetical story, which has nothing to do with anything, but I'll tell it. We like to say that we met in the back of a police car, because she was doing her master's thesis at the time on police training. And she had gone down to the Austin Police Department, spoken to the chief, and said, I'd like permission to attend your police academy because I want to do a thesis on how police are trained. And he was very enthusiastic about it and said, absolutely, come on, just give us a copy of your thesis. There were no women police officers at the time. And they welcomed her into their class as one of their own, even though she wasn't, there to be a policeman. She went to the firing range. She did all of the practical problems and the classroom stuff and the physical calisthenics and everything. The only thing they wouldn't let her do was when it came time for the cadets to be assigned to real police officers to experience what it's like to be out on the street in a shift. They said, no, you can't do that because it would not look right for a woman not in handcuffs to be in a police car with an officer. The public's going to think it's his girlfriend. So not to be discouraged, she came back to the dorm and said, I need somebody to be my companion. And I thought that sounded pretty cool. So, and I liked her anyway. So we would go down to the police station at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. They would assign us an officer. We would ride around till 6 a.m. And that turned out to be so much fun and so interesting and we made friends with all the officers on all the shifts and so on, that long after she had finished her thesis, our idea of a Saturday night date was to go down to the cops and ride around until 6 a.m. So anyway, that's just a parenthetical thing. But by then, so it would have been probably around 75 that we did what all good, good, couples do, which is we rented apartments right next door to each other up on 39th Street, as I recall. And we got married in 1978. And she had a position at St. Edward's University here in Austin, She was a professor of sociology and criminal justice and spent 37 years there, ending up as dean of the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and eventually, unfortunately, had to retire back in 2013 because she got Alzheimer's disease, and she is currently in memory care with advanced Alzheimer's.
Okay.
So,
Well, fantastic story.
yeah.
I'm glad to hear that you were living in my neighborhood. That's about where I was living, near Speedway and north of campus. For some reason I imagined.
Yeah.
So let's look a little bit at the institutions, and should we talk about the Computation Center, or should we talk about CS, or both of them together?
Well, let's start with CS.
Okay.
The one thing that really pained me about coming to UT rather than to Stanford or MIT was that I no longer had a PDP-10 to play with. Stevens had gotten a DEC-10 back around 1969. And I worked for the Computer Center there, and they had a very wise director who basically said, this computer center is going to be run by students. He had a skeleton staff of responsible adults kind of overseeing things, but all of the operations, the systems programming, everything to do with, the computer was students. And that's how I learned about the DEC-10. I became a systems programmer. I was doing operating system installations and all sorts of things like that. And when I arrived at UT and I discovered that they had a CDC 6600, which was several times more powerful than the PDP-10, but that I had to go and use the key punch again to prepare decks of punched cards, I was just in agony, okay? That was just like a return to the dark ages. But, it is what it is. They eventually got a terminal, interactive terminal system called Taurus, which at least let you, sit at a dumb terminal and interact with the CDC system. So that got rid of the punch cards at least. But all of the tools, the editors and so on, were so primitive compared to the software that the 10 offered that I was still suffering, greatly. Now, I had to work through 3 PhD advisors. The first one was a guy by the name of Bill Henneman, who had gotten his PhD a couple of years before from the MIT AI lab.
Okay.
Very, very interesting fellow. He was a high school dropout. And he showed up one day at the MIT AI lab and impressed Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert sufficiently that they admitted him into the AI lab on the spot with no high school and no college degree. And he eventually left there with a PhD. But he didn't get tenure at UT, so he was gone after 2 years. I had to go to another one. And then he left, and finally, we're now up around 1979, 78, 79. I went to my third advisor, and when he decided to leave, I said, okay, I'm not going to go to a fourth. I've got to get out of here. I've got to stop, having fun with the DEC-10 and just get my thesis done. I had finished all the course requirements and everything back around 74. In fact, I arrived with a master's degree because I had gotten the master's simultaneously with a bachelor's at Stevens by, killing myself over the summers. And so when I arrived at the computer science department at UT, I was cocky enough to think that I could just go right into the qualifiers, pass the qualifiers, and just start writing my dissertation. And the faculty at the University of Texas took a dim view of that. They said, well, you may be here with a master's, but you're going to have to pass our qualifiers, and to do that, you're going to have to take our courses. Okay. So I had to take about 2 years worth of CS courses, which actually turned out to be great because it's stuff that I had not really taken up at Stevens, and I think it rounded me out as a computer scientist pretty well. Numerical analysis and automata theory and all sorts of stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So, and during that time, I had been offered a research assistantship. It wasn't actually a fellowship; it was a research assistantship. And so I was a teaching assistantship. So I was teaching introductory computers to the freshman students, and I loved that. I mean, it was great. I really loved teaching. But around 1975, I guess around spring of 75, I had run out of eligibility to be a teaching assistant. Okay. And they told me, sorry, but, and at one point they made me an assistant instructor, trying to keep me on. But finally they said, okay, look, you really have to get out of here. And so by coincidence, it was the spring of 75 when the DEC-10 arrived on the UT campus. Right. And if you read the Soul of an Old Machine that I wrote, I said, I think it was, I greeted that with the joy of a prisoner being released from the dungeon. I walked over to the comm center. I went straight into the director's office and essentially said, here I am. I know that system backwards and forwards. Hire me. And they hired me. And I became, one of the main systems programmers for the DEC-10 at UT. They installed it over at the Humanities Research Center, the HRC, now known as the Harry Ransom Center, on the 3rd floor. And I met my boss, who was Patricia Karoon, and a bunch of different colleagues like Tommy Loomis and Rick Watson and so on. But backing up to the CS department for a minute, during those first few years, I was busy taking courses. Then I passed the qualifiers and started writing my dissertation, and made friends with fellow grad students, including Rich Cohen and a fellow named Mabry Tyson, who just retired from SRI out in California. It was a fun time. It was, a very stimulating environment, and, artificial intelligence was a shadow of what it is today, but that's what I got my thesis in. What I wrote my dissertation on, which was pre-processing and problem-solving systems. I was doing kind of robotic simulation problems with the blocks world, like stacking blocks, unstacking blocks, and how to plan, how to get software to make robust plans to do those types of tasks.
It's that MIT program that I don't know how to pronounce. Shridlu or Shudderlu?
Yeah, Shridlu.
Shridlu.
Shridlu was the it was also known as ELIZA and Doctor when it made over to the DEC-10, which was essentially a dialogue with. Am I correct about that? Shridlu, I think, was a version of ELIZA, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I'm picturing the blocks and the robotic arm.
Oh, okay. Oh, you know what? Okay, so there was an MIT student, grad student there by the name of Terry Winograd.
Yes.
Yes, and he was the one that did Shridlu. You're right, and that was the blocks world. And so everybody started. He kind of introduced that as a that plus Shaky out at SRI, which was a physical robot, and was also doing those types of tasks. everybody started using that as a good model for, improving problem solving systems and so
Yep.
on. Yep, you're right. I'm sorry.
Understood. So Clive, you actually already hit on the next question. Let's back up a little bit. HRC. So the question is, how is it that DEC-10 ended up in HRC? What was the sequence of events for that? And was this surprising?
Yeah, I mean, I was vaguely aware that the building existed. I'd never been in it, and I thought, why does the comp center have space over here? I don't know the circumstances, because by the time I got hired by the comp center, it was a done deal. The 10 had arrived, and so I think it was just a question of, hey, we need space for this thing, and they figured out, okay, we've got some space over there,
Okay.
and so that's where they put it.
Okay. This would be, I think, the simplest possibility, right? So yeah, we'll in a few minutes we'll get to the question of the Linguistics Research Center, which was also there in HRC.
Right across the hall, yes.
Okay. We'll get to that. We'll come to that. I wanted to ask you, would you say that there was anything special about the atmosphere being there in HRC, or?
There was certainly very nice synergy between the Linguistics Research Center and the Comp Center. Now the HRC has been completely remodeled since those days. They basically gutted the third floor. I think they may have even, it's now like a huge reading room, which is very nice. And I had the impression that they'd actually raised the ceiling to make it a better, but the third and fourth floors are kind of a public library reading room type of a place. Before then, it was just, hallways with closed office doors, but there was a central core surrounded by 4 hallways, which is where the DEC-10 machine room was. And so, and then on the western side of that was the Linguistics Research Center. They had a whole string of offices along that corridor. And those folks were, they gravitated to the DEC-10 very quickly. And, there was one researcher there by the name of Dr. Helen Jo Hewitt, who she was an amazing woman, but one of the things she was, before this became even a thing, she was a font hacker. She was like, she loved fonts, every font you could think of. And she realized that the DEC-10 had some capability. This was before laser printers. This was back when you had those daisy wheel robotic typewriters, where, if you wanted to prepare a document that had like Greek letters and stuff, you would type the document, it would pause, you would roll back the page, you would pop out the English daisy wheel, you'd pop in the Greek daisy wheel, and then you would go back and fill in the places where the Greek letters needed to be. And the same for all sorts of diacritics, all the accents and the tildes and the cedillas and all of that. So one of the projects that I did for her, which I really enjoyed and she loved me for it, was a series of TECO macros that would do all of this automatically. It would go through a document and insert the necessary escape sequences to pause the thing, roll the page back. It would, you would then switch out the daisy wheel, and then it would go back and, automatically skip to the spots where diacritics or foreign characters needed to be. And so she would just sit back and just watch this thing, and the only thing she had to do was change daisy wheels. And that became a real challenging series of TECO macros for that. But and one of the main activities of the Linguistics Research Center at the time was machine translation. They had a project with Siemens Corporation for German to English translation called METAL, METAL. And all of this work was being done on the DEC-10 before it eventually moved to the DEC-20 when I took over that.
I'm glad you said this. I for some reason had gotten the impression that this was still on the CDC. I'm happy to know that it was on the DEC-10. This is good.
Well, I think they did have some software on the CDC, but I think they got over to the DEC-10 with all due haste.
I would hope so. I would hope so, right? And I'm glad to have it confirmed.
Plus, it was so convenient for them to have like the computer right across the hall where they could go. I mean, the only thing they had terminals in their offices, but they had a line printer right across the hall, and that was very convenient for them. So they loved having the computer nearby.
I'll just note real quick that we just learned a few weeks ago that Tommy Loomis actually continued working on metal with Siemens.
Yes.
For
Yes,
many,
he
many
actually
years
went.
after.
Yes, he went. I believe he went to Germany. In fact. Yeah.
So this is something to follow up on later. But yeah, this is a long story.
Right.
I wanted to ask you about a few other names. These are the next questions. So the name George Culp, certainly, but also the name Jim Brown, I think 2 professors.
Yeah. Well, Jim Brown was definitely a force of nature, and he was chairman of the CS department for many years. He didn't like me very much.
Okay.
And the reason for that was because back in and this again is one of the reasons that my graduate student career extended for so long, is that I would go into Bill Henneman's office and he would tell me stories of the MIT AI lab. And he loved chess and I loved chess, and we would sit in his office playing chess on any number of afternoons as we talked about AI and talked about MIT and so on. And Jim Brown would walk by the open door and see me and Henneman playing chess. And he thought that was just such an utter waste of time. I'm sure it probably affected his career directly.
Right.
And it affected my career indirectly because, I should have been working on my dissertation. But Jim Brown was, he was, forget about it, and by the way, after I got my degree, all was forgiven. And I was, he and I worked closely together because he, among other things, was the chairman of the faculty computer committee.
Exactly.
And the faculty computer committee was basically responsible for, plotting the direction not only of the Computation Center, but, of their acquisitions. And, they were responsible for raising the funds to obtain the DEC-20. And I'll get into how research on the DEC-20 took place. But Jim Brown was definitely, and he was there for many, many years after that. A lot of students, got their degrees under him. He had an outside company called IC Squared, I believe, that was, doing work on databases and languages and so on. And a lot of students, including names like, I want to say like Forrest Basket and Tom Keller and a bunch of others whose names I forget, were closely associated with Jim Brown and his outside company.
Understood. This makes total sense. Yeah, they had worked with him from early on, from the late 60s.
Yep.
Jim Brown was their main, I think, faculty.
He was their mentor, advisor, and so on. And he was probably, he together with Woody Bledsoe were probably the two most powerful people in the computer science department in terms of policy and, direction and so on and so forth. George Culp he had office space in the DEC-10 complex over at the HRC. So, I got to know him pretty well. I wasn't really involved in his computerized education CBE project, but, he constantly needed help in getting one thing or another to get to run on the 10. And so, I would help him with that. And I understand that he's still living out there in, west of Austin, Fredericksburg or Llano or someplace like that. And he would be a good person to try and track down.
Indeed. I will make a note of that. Any other names from that era that you think of?
Yes. So another professor that brought in a lot of money to the computer science department was Don Good. And speaking of the Comp Center, when I first arrived, was in Wagner Hall. I think we had a discussion of this online. Wagner Hall was immediately east of the Comp Center under the steps, between Speedway and Inner Campus Drive. That was where Wagner Hall was, and it housed the classics department and
philosophy
and I'm thinking even maybe a chunk of geology in the basement. I'm not sure, but anyway, that's where the CS department was, and that's where I met the professor who interviewed me back in 1970,
right.
Who was a fellow by the name of Dr. Angus Pearson. He and his wife, Erna Pearson, were two beloved faculty members of the CS department for many years. And I was his teaching assistant for CS 404G, which was the introductory course. Anyway, the CS department eventually moved over to Painter Hall, but quickly outgrew the space because it was sharing it with physics and astronomy. Astronomy had the telescope up on the roof of Painter, and they had, chemistry labs or physics labs down in the basement. I don't know. We had, I believe, the second and third floors and maybe some part of the fourth floor for CS, but it wasn't enough. And Don Good was the head of what was called the CMP, which was the Certifiable Mini Computer Project. And they ended up getting space in the tower. So what happened was that in those years, I'm thinking in the late 70s, I'm not exactly sure, it would have probably been mid 70s, like 75 or so. That was when the Perry Castaneda Library finally opened across from the Jester Dormitory on Speedway and 21st Street. And so the main library, which was that up until then had been in the main building, right, including all the stacks up, the full length of the tower, was moved over to Perry Castaneda, thereby leaving all of this open space in the stacks. And CS department snapped up, I think, one floor or two for the Certifiable Mini Computer Project, where Don Good was. Rich Cohen worked for them. And we eventually ended up having to get a cable from one of their systems down to the Comp Center for the IMP, because they were hooked to the ARPANET back then. And that was an interesting project, to say the least. Anyway, the only other thing I'll mention about the space in the tower, again, this is another story in the same flavor as the police story. I'm an amateur magician, and I was told when I first arrived on campus that the University of Texas had acquired a collection of Harry Houdini's papers, And I was very interested in tracking those down because I wanted to see stuff belonging to Houdini. And so I went to the library and I said, where can I find this? And it took a while, but I finally got to somebody who said, oh yeah, we have all that stuff on the 19th floor of the tower in the middle, all the stacks. The 19th floor has all that stuff. So I take the elevator up to the 19th floor of the tower. The elevator door opens and I am greeted by a room full of cardboard boxes just stacked every which way. It was just really a pile of junk, boxes everywhere. There was nobody there, not a soul, okay? And so I walk in and I start poking around and I open some of these boxes and all of a sudden I'm reading original Harry Houdini letters that he wrote. This was all of his stuff. And it was sitting there just scattered around in cardboard boxes on the 19th floor, open to anybody who happens to go up there. I was horrified. I was absolutely horrified that someone like me could just walk in and do that. I am happy to report that the Houdini collection was transferred to the HRC, in fact.
Okay.
It is now a curated collection. It's one of their star things, and you can go to their reading room and, put on the white gloves and check out, check out the material and peruse it to your heart's content. And they have exhibits of it and so on. But man, I just remember me getting my grubby hands into those boxes and, hopefully I didn't do much damage. Anyway.
Those are the good old, that's the good old UT when
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So anyway, so so CS was scattered pretty much in all sorts of places. Painter Hall, the tower, several people, including Woody Bledsoe, who was actually a joint appointment between computer science and math, had his office over in PMA that then became RLM, that then went back to PMA.
Right.
And he was up on one of the higher floors of the tower. That's where his office was. He was a member of my PhD committee, in fact, since he was, intimately connected with AI, in particular automatic theorem proving. He's one of the world pioneers in automatic theorem proving, and a very good friend of mine. He very sadly eventually got ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and passed away. I guess it must have been sometime in the 80s or early 90s. And he came to me at that time for help in trying to get automated speech onto his computer so that he could continue trying to use a computer as long as he could. And so I would go over to his house and help him set up various pieces of hardware and things, and was in touch with him until he passed away. But he and I were pretty close. I would say that Woody Bledsoe was probably the professor that I was the closest to throughout my, and not only because of his time at UT, but in 1984, when MCC came to town and got started, and Bobby Inman became the head of MCC, he hired Woody Bledsoe to head up the artificial intelligence lab at MCC. Woody Bledsoe turned around and hired me to run the entire computer infrastructure at MCC. And the first thing I told him was, that computer, the DEC-20 that you like to use so much at UT, I want to get one for MCC. And that was a little tricky because in 1985, I believe, DEC announced the end of their 36-bit computers.
Right.
And we knew that the DEC-20 was not going to have any follow-on or any successors. And yet I convinced Woody that it doesn't matter, I can keep it running forever. And
so there was a DEC-20 at MCC.
Right. And so, we started we started with the DEC-20 at MCC, and basically graduated to Symbolics Lisp machines. And we were the largest installation of Symbolics Lisp machines in the country, I think, for a while there. And I ran all of them plus the 20 until I left MCC in the late 90s. So
I have heard this lore that MCC was I've heard it as the greatest concentration of Lisp machines in the world.
well, I wouldn't be surprised. It was
Right.
we definitely. I mean, Symbolics, who was there were two basic flavors of Lisp machines, both of them arising originally at MIT, had been built by faculty and grad students there, but there was kind of a split at MIT in philosophy, and those ended up being giving way to the Symbolics Lisp machines and the Lambda Lisp machines, and those were two separate companies. We went with Symbolics, and Symbolics even put their offices in the building that MCC first occupied before they moved to their main installation on Balcones and on Breaker Lane.
So in my outline, I had the CMP a bit later, but
okay.
I want to ask one of the questions now. I had the impression that your dissertation might have been related to work at CMP, but now it sounds like it's because of Woody Bledsoe that.
No, so Woody was not directly involved with CMP. That was Don Good.
Okay.
And they were working, like I say, on they were working on theorem proving in the sense that they were trying to prove program correctness, verify. Essentially, it was verifiable software, rigidly, formally verified software for hardware that was in use by the Defense Department, and in particular the NSA. So they had a box that was delivered to them by the NSA called, I think it was the BCR box, which is what was connected to the ARPANET. And they ran software on that and used the DEC-10 and originally the DEC-10 and then later the DEC-20 to run their verification programs and so on to develop software for that.
So this is a great point right here. So the next topic is to talk about the dawn of the ARPANET on campus. So,
right.
So maybe we can dive into these together.
Yeah, let me just mention that if you want, the authoritative story on CMP is going to be Rich Cohen. He worked for CMP. He was part of that project. And so all CMP stuff, he knows, 100 times more than I do about all of that.
I would love to talk to Rich.
Well, I was going to suggest that maybe you would want to do a joint oral history, because he and I feed on each other and refresh each other's memories really well. So, but anyway, we seem to be doing okay so far here. So yeah, that was CMP, and let's see. Do I have anything left to say about the CS department in general? I think we've covered that. The faculty.
On the outline, I think we've come through kind of how the DEC-10 arrived.
Right.
We want to look at how the ARPANET kind of arrived as well, and maybe finish up with just what the day-to-day life was like there in the Computation Center.
Yeah. So, I got an office over at the HRC, right next to the DEC-10 machine room. And basically just, we had a staff of about 5 or 6 systems programmers, 2 or 3 systems programmers and user consultants and I guess they call it user services now. We developed into a very close-knit group, and you can read about that in the piece that I wrote about it when we shut that down in 1982. You've seen, we had T-shirts made for our staff that said DEC-10, we share our time. So that was a close group. And one day, basically because of the CMP project, we heard that an imp was going to come to campus.
Okay.
And they didn't really have a place for it. So they put it in the machine room with the DEC-10. And, some mysterious people from BB&N in Boston came and hooked it up. And they basically said, don't touch it, and left. And for at least several months, if not a year, the imp was simply a node that had no host computers hooked to it. It was just a midpoint between White Sands in New Mexico and Gunter Air Force Base in Alabama. And, those lines stretched and met in Texas, and there was the imp. I remember one memorable occasion when my boss at the time, a fellow by the name of David Phillips, who had taken over from Patricia Caroon, and who had been working over at Texas Student Publications and running their PDP-11 over there, but he worked for the Comm Center, so they brought him over and they had him manage the DEC-10 installation. So he became our boss. Very nice fellow. And one day, I believe that he was wandering through the machine room, and I don't know if there was some maintenance going on that we had to shut down the system or what, but he accidentally, well, on purpose accidentally, turned off the power to the imp. Okay. I would say that it took about 30 seconds for the phone sitting on top of the imp to start ringing.
From Boston.
And it was from Boston, and it was basically what happened to the southern leg of the ARPANET.
Beautiful.
And so that was quickly, he turned it back on, it automatically rebooted, and things were okay. But, that was not something that ever happened again. Eventually, we decided, well, look, we've got this thing, we might as well use it. What are we going to hook to it? And the immediate obvious thing was, well, let's hook up the DEC-10. But it turned out that the DEC-10 did not have the necessary hardware, or the software for that matter, to handle an imp. And, we would have had to get software from either CMU or Harvard, plus add some hardware. And it wouldn't have even been TOPS 10, it would have been 10X, which was the alternative operating system for the DEC-10 that was developed up at BB&N in Boston. So that didn't sound like there were too many customers of the DEC-10 on campus. It was not just the CS department, it was campus wide. And it would have been a far too big of a disruption. So they decided instead that the PDP-11 would be a much more convenient thing. We could easily get the necessary software from the University of Illinois, which we did. We installed it on the PDP-11 that was at the time over in the communications building, in the basement of the communications building where the printing presses for the Daily Texan were.
Right.
And David knew all of those people anyway, so it all worked out. And because of that, the imp got moved from the DEC-10 machine room over to the communications building. It wasn't until a few years later that the Comm Center got its own PDP-11. I think the Texas Student Publications may have had like a PDP-1145 or one of the mid-range PDP-11s. This all predated the VAX, otherwise it would have been a VAX. But the Comm Center bought a PDP-1170, installed it in the Comm Center next to the CDC, And that became the obvious choice for the IMP. So that was at that time that they moved the IMP over to the Comp Center. And it was at that time also that the CMP project up in the tower got its PCR box, which had to be connected. So they ran the cable. They ran essentially the cable from the tower down to the Comp Center. And by that time, I was running the DEC-20 over in Painter Hall. So they ran a cable from the DEC-20 to the Comp Center so that the DEC-20 could get onto the ARPANET. The DEC-20s were, easily, all you had to do was get an AN20 box, which we did. And that was, and the software existed. So that was easily connected.
And just to note that this AN20 is now in Clive's garage. So
it is, and if you want, I can even take my laptop and wander over to my garage and show it to you.
So we'll ask for some photos.
Okay.
Email us some photos.
Yeah. When the DEC-20 was finally uninstalled at UT, it went over to what's now the Pickle Research Center in North Campus, and they have this huge surplus warehouse of furniture and equipment and everything else, and that's where the old DEC-20 ended up. And I wandered over there one day, and I said, how about if I'd like to buy one cabinet of the DEC-20? Sure, yeah, $100. And I borrowed a pickup truck from somebody and hauled it to my house. And that was a totally irrational and totally unabashedly sentimental thing to do.
And totally legendary.
Yeah.
Totally legendary. So was there only one IMP or was a second IMP?
No, there was only one IMP.
There was only one, okay.
There was only one IMP, but it had, I believe, a total of either 4 or possibly as many as 6. I think it was 4 ports that you could hook hosts up to.
Yep.
So originally it was the PDP-11 over at the Texas Student Publications. And then when the IMP was moved over to the Comm Center, I think certainly the 11 stayed installed. The Comm Center's PDP-11 stayed installed. The DEC-20 plugged in, and the hardware up on in the tower plugged in. So we had 3 hosts hooked to the IMP at that time.
Totally understood. This is great to know. I had
excuse me. And then when I left when I left UT in 1985 and went to MCC and bought the DEC-20 over there, we clearly needed to be on the ARPANET. So we actually ran a line from Breaker Lane, well, actually originally from the Echelon buildings on 183, and then later from the main MCC building on Breaker, via the Pickle Research Center with a microwave link to the main campus into the IMP.
I have many times looked at this microwave link. I'm fully aware of it. Yeah. So I was guessing we would get to the microwave link. Yeah, between.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say the first 4 internet computers in Texas, right there.
Yeah. And I claim responsibility for installing number 2, which was the DEC-20 in Painter Hall.
Sounds like you had a lot to do with the one at MCC as well, though. So
yes, yeah, that was maybe like number 5 or something. Well, actually, no, but that wasn't. We're talking now the whole state of Texas, mind you. Okay, because see, okay, so here's an interesting sidelight. In around late 80s, 87, 88, 89, it was clearly going to be the end of the ARPANET. Okay. CSNet was arriving. All of these commercial networks that were trying to emulate the the ARPANET, and the Defense Department finally realized, okay, we've done our thing, we're out of here, we're going to let commercial people take over. But we need to keep the skeleton ARPANET for our Defense Department installations, all the military bases and military research and such. Unfortunately, Texas didn't qualify. And we were in deep trouble because they were going to basically take the imp away from Austin. And I got on the phone with the people at Defense DDA, whatever, the Defense something agency, who essentially ran all the lines for the ARPANET. And AT&T for that matter, because they were the AT&T long lines were the ones that went out to White Sands and to Gunter Air Force Base in Alabama. Okay, so by then, another ARPANET link had appeared in Dallas at Collins Radio. Collins Radio had defense contracts, and they were an ARPANET node.
Okay.
And I got the brilliant idea, if I do say so myself, that if we could run a line and pay for it ourselves from Collins Radio down to Austin, we could stay on as a like a dead end spur of the ARPANET. And it took a lot of phone calls to the Defense Department, and it took a lot of phone calls to AT&T to arrange all of this. But eventually we managed to get a line, and, you know, at our expense, I'm talking MCC's expense at this point, but UT Austin was a beneficiary here. They ran a line from Collins Radio down to the comp center at UT, and that allowed us to stay on, quote unquote, the ARPANET, which pretty soon, you know, became the internet. And the lines to White Sands and to Gunter disappeared, but that's how we managed to stay on for a while longer.
And this is right about when I first got onto campus. So my first internet experience was probably via this exact configuration. So through the UTM to Dallas Collins Radio, and onto the wider net. Right. Let's back up a little bit. When you've mentioned, I think in an email, that when the IMP was first hooked up in TSP,
yes,
you were able to dial in.
Right.
How many people were doing that? How many people were able to dial in back then?
That was a closely guarded secret.
I bet it was.
Because they didn't have that many ports. And, you know, priority went to the people who were publishing the Daily Texan, among other things. But at night, they had a few dial-up ports through a piece of hardware called the MICOM, which was essentially the terminal concentrator that served the UT campus. So you could dial up to the MICOM and say, I want to connect to, you know, the PDP-11 at TSP. And once you got on that, then you could basically go out to the ARPANET anywhere you wanted.
You could tell that. You could tell that then.
And so there was a group of us in the CS department, in the Linguistics Research Center, and in the math department, the Woody Bledsoe people, who, you know, knew about this. And, you know, we would get on and we would immediately, you know, there was a few places, but the best place to connect to by far was MIT. And there were hosts up there like MIT AI. This was a brand new concept to us, which was you'd connect, you know, you'd telnet to the host, and you basically could start running commands. You didn't even need to log in. I mean, you logged in just so that people would know who you were, but there was no password required. And I'm thinking, what insanity is this? How do they guard their stuff? No, it didn't matter. And of course, the main force behind that was Richard Stallman, who was at the MIT AI lab, who was the legendary, free software, free everything person, who was responsible for, all of the GNU stuff eventually, and the free licensing and so on that took place. He came to Austin a couple of times to give a lecture at MCC, and he refused to enter the building because they required identification at the desk, and he did not want any part of that. Bob Boyer, who was one of the other faculty members of the CS department and who worked at MCC, had to actually host the lecture at his house. And we had to go to his house to listen to Stallman because he refused to step foot on MCC property. But anyway, so yeah, we would get on, and it was like we would play Zork. Zork was developed on MIT-DM and using a language called Muddle, known as MDL. And that was, there were no other. And now, of course, that's one of the lowest quality types of interactive games there is, considering how far we've come with interactive graphics and everything else. But back then, that was very addicting, and I don't want to even tell you how many hours we spent playing Adventure and Zork on the MIT machines. And just, I was exploring their version of TECO, which was nothing like the TECO that that DEC supported. It was far more advanced and became the basis. In fact, Emacs.
It was the OS. The command line was. Well, that was DDT.
Sort of. Yeah, DDT was essentially the OS. But Emacs, the legendary editor developed by Stallman, was essentially a collection of TECO macros. Mm-hmm. Emacs was originally built on top of TECO, and that inspired me when I saw what they had done with TECO up there. I said, okay, I don't know that I can duplicate that, but I'm going to take DEC's version of TECO, which at that time did not have any video terminal, any video display support at all, and at least put in support for video terminals, being able to move the cursor back and that sort of thing. And so that became a very widely used version. DEC's version was TECO 24. I developed TECO 124, and pretty soon I started getting requests from all over the country. They would send me, 9-track mag tapes saying, please send us your version of TECO. And I was exporting TECO all over the world, not over the world. Well, okay, a few over the world. I think I sent a couple of tapes overseas, but it was mostly to places all over the country, including the NSA, by the way. Where the guy says, I really want your version of TECO. You can't send it to me at work. Send it to me at home. I'll figure out how I can get it into work.
So I want to note for anybody reading this interview in future years that we're hoping to. One of the things we would like to do is restore Clive's version of TECO. It was used for DECWAR, so it would be nice to have a working version again.
Yep.
And I also want to note that everything we're hearing here is kind of the legends. The real legends from the old day.
Yeah.
How many people, do you think 25, 50 people from Austin were able to get out?
Get on the net? I would say it was 25 or less.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it would grow slowly over time. And then once the DEC-20 got hooked up, then that was like the floodgates got open, because anybody who got an account on the DEC-20 would be able to tell that anywhere they wanted.
That's exactly the next topic on our
right
outline is the migration to the DEC-20, Painter Hall.
Right. Okay, so the DEC-20 right from the start was intended to be a dedicated research machine, and as such, so there was a group, a consortium, if you will, of departments and research groups within UT that, kind of contributed to the purchase of the DEC-20. They then contracted with the Comp Center to run it for them, which is what my role was. I was the manager of, and I had just gotten my my degree finally. I graduated in November of 1980, and immediately I got a nice raise and a new title, and became the manager of the DEC-20. So I had to leave the DEC-10, which was still going to be in the HRC for another 2 years. And I still maintained very close ties with all those people, but my new job was to bring the DEC-20 up and get it running. And there were originally 5 groups that had contributed to the purchase of the 20. There was the CS department itself. There was ATP, which was the Automatic Theorem Proving Group from Woody Bledsoe. There was CMP under Don Good, the people up in the tower. There was LRC, which was the Linguistics Research Center. And there was, I believe, ICS, which was Jim Brown's group. Okay. And all of those people got accounts on the 20, and, you know, they allocated all the available disk space and so on. It's so funny to even think about how much disk space that system had. I think we had like gas, maybe about 600 megabytes total of well, no, that's not true, because they were measured in words, which were 5 7-bit words, 7-bit bytes. So you can, you know, anyway, it was maybe a little over a gig, if anything, a gigabyte of storage. And of course, the disk units were the size of washing machines, and you could store, you know, 400 meg on each one. So yeah, all of those groups got established on the DEC-20. They started, you know, collaborating with their colleagues across the country on the internet, and you know, it was a great system, if I do say so myself. We had a lot of fun on it. One of the people who worked at CMP, a fellow by the name of Mike Smith, who I'm actually going to go to a concert with tomorrow night, he contributed. Now, the cool thing about the DEC-20 was that the colors were white and burnt orange. Yep. That were the official DEC colors, right?
Right.
And so he brought in this enormous set of Longhorns, and we put them on top of the cabinet in the machine room, in the DEC-20 machine room. And they stayed for the entire, you know, for the length of the life of the DEC-20 at Painter Hall. It had this big set of Longhorns on the top of it. So
we would love to have photos of the DEC-20.
Yeah, somewhere I probably have a picture of those Longhorns, and I have the nameplate of it. That's another thing that I managed to salvage. One interesting story about the DEC-20 in Painter Hall. The Comp Center had what they called an RJE terminal over in Painter, which was essentially just a line printer and a card reader for people in Painter. And, you know, people would choose the closest RJE terminal on campus, and there was one over in Taylor Hall and then the one in Painter, and they would come over to submit their decks and get their printouts from the CDC. So they they divided up that space and made a room for the DEC-20. They raised the floors so we could get the cabling underneath and so on. And you know, it looked pretty good. Well, one winter, I think it was probably the winter of 1981 or 82, as I recall, maybe even 83. It was cold. It was very cold. And the people at the physical plant decided that they didn't need to have the water chiller air conditioning system running, because it was plenty cold enough, and, you know, there was no summer heat and nothing. And so they turned it off. Okay. The DEC-20 did not agree with that at all. And that room started overheating. And I made frantic calls to the physical plant about, you got to get the air conditioning back on in Painter because, we've got machines that are overheating here. And, oh, well, this is going to take us, I don't know how long, and blah, blah, blah. And we got to go up the chain and so on. Just do it and get it done. But meanwhile, the temperature kept rising, and I knew that the 20 was going to shut down at any moment. And I was trying to keep it running. So I decided to open the windows, and let the cold air in from outside into the DEC-20. And I remember sending out a message from the console to all the users of the DEC-20 saying, save your work often. We're on kind of life support here. I've opened the windows, and that'll buy us a little bit more time until, hopefully they'll get the air conditioning back on. Well, about an hour later, it started snowing. I kid you not. This is one of it only snows in Austin less than once every 10 years. It started snowing. And I somewhere have the scrap of paper from the DEC-20 console saying, DEC-20 will shut down in 20 minutes. I've had to close the windows to keep the snow out.
I hope you can find this piece of paper as well.
Yeah, it's there. So I got it somewhere.
We would love to have photos of these. So yeah, that's a great story. All right. Where are we at here? All right. We're in Painter. I have a quick question for you, kind of about the broader UT Comp Center. So I think the CDC cyber was down there in the machine room, kind of mid 70s, late 70s.
Yeah, the CDC 6600 gave way to the cyber, I'm guessing late 70s, probably.
Okay. I'm just curious, were you aware of the cyber being used by the aerospace department? Was that in your awareness at all, or?
I knew about the aerospace engineering department. I knew they had accounts on it. They didn't have any accounts on the DEC machines, as far as I knew. Okay. So no, I didn't have any direct involvement with those folks.
Okay. Yeah, I think my professor and his colleagues, they were on the cyber, and I didn't think they were on the DEC machines. So this kind of confirms that. That's good to know.
Right. There were a couple of interesting departments that I did have contact with, only because they were avid DEC-10 users. And one of them was the petroleum engineering department, because Robert Schneider was an avid DECWAR person.
Right.
And in fact, he was the one that made up the T-shirts. Dr. Fonken never played DECWAR, which were worn on the going away party for the DEC-10. Uh-huh. I can tell you, Dr. Fonken was the vice president for research of the university at that time, and it was his ultimate decision to shut down the DEC-10. We thought that he was an evil man and how could he possibly do this? But I guess one of his good traits was common sense and financial sense, and he could see the numbers and we couldn't. So it was a no-brainer as far as he was concerned. And the other department was the zoology department, because there was a faculty member over there by the name of Dick Richardson, who was also
Dick Richardson, or I knew Dick Richardson.
Yeah, he passed away sadly, but he was an avid DEC-10 user. I don't know if he ever played DECWAR, but he was definitely an avid DEC-10 user.
I can imagine Dick playing DECWAR. Dick Richardson was a character.
Yeah,
this is beautiful.
Yeah, he was over in Patterson.
Yep. I had a job in Patterson for a few years. That's when I worked with Dick Richardson a lot on computers, of course. I was doing computer support in Patterson. So beautiful. Okay. Two other names. So these are from the older generation. I'm just curious if you had any interaction or knowledge of Al Matson in chemistry, or David Young, who, David
Young actually I think he taught one of my numerical analysis courses that I was taking as a young grad student.
Probably so.
And I knew him because I think he was also a member of the faculty computer committee. And I would occasionally have to go to those meetings and make some presentation or another about the status of the DEC-20 and whatnot. But I never, he wasn't an advisor of mine or anything like that. So
he was around.
The other name, the chemistry name, I don't remember at all.
Okay.
The chemistry person that represented chemistry on the faculty computer committee for mostly cyber and CDC issues, because he wasn't on the DEC-10, was Legowski.
Right.
Dr. Legowski. And the irony is that after I retired, and just a few years ago, I had my hobby still is, I help senior citizens out with their computer issues. I'll go and set up their Macs for them, or fix their email or their cable TV or whatever. And I generally will go to retirement homes to do this. And one fine day, I got a call from this woman living at a place called the Carencia, which is one of the high-end retirement homes here in Austin. And I walk in, and she was in fact the widow of Dr. Legowski.
Okay.
And so she and I had a lot of great conversations about him.
Nice, very nice. Okay, wonderful. We're moving on in our outline. Next up was to talk about research programs, CMP, LRC. Let me ask you this: are there any other major research programs that we should have the names of?
Okay, so CMP, I've already told you, the authority on that is going to be Rich Cohen.
Okay.
LRC at the time was directed by Dr. Winfried Lehmann, Lehman, who passed away many years ago. And his successor was a staff member for the LRC who was also a fellow grad student of mine. And we got our PhDs at roughly the same time, by the name of Jonathan Slocum. And
I know that.
he ended up being director of the LRC for many years. And he retired. I went to his house. He lives on the Mueller site, which is the old airport, which they turned into houses and stuff. So he and his wife live out there, and I saw him like maybe 3 months ago at his house, and he's doing pretty well. I think he may have some health issues, but his memory is still pretty good. And any more details on LRC, he would be a good person to contact. And I certainly remember his username, lrc.slocum. All the users on the DEC-20 were, the initials of the research project, like cmp.cohen and cmp.good, lrc.slocum. I, of course, was CC Dawson for Comp Center, and ATP.Bledsoe for automatic theorem proving. So ATP, there was ATP, yeah, that was the automatic theorem proving project of Woody Bledsoe's, which was,
those are the three biggies, three big research programs. We've got those.
Yeah. Oh, the other one that I'm thinking of that I forgot about, cognitive science.
Cognitive science.
Yeah, CGS.
CGS, okay.
And I'm trying to think. So there was a faculty member named Lauri Kartunen, who was Norwegian, as I recall, and his wife, Fran Kartunen. He was CGS. So they also had a presence on the DEC-20, but I don't know very many details about exactly what they were. I mean, it was kind of a cross between linguistics and AI, as best I could remember. Yeah.
It's good to know the name. It's good to have the name. And
yeah, that was another Yeah, that was another one of the main research groups, and I could come up with some more names from them. But I think what happened was they got some funding. They decided to contribute to the DEC-20 so that they could get in on it, and so they did. And we set up accounts for them, and they were good users.
So the next questions are kind of about, let's say, official policy on using the resources on the DEC-10 and the DEC-20. Were there written policies? Were they enforced?
As far as comp center policies, the DEC-10 was just another one of the stable of computers that were run by the comp center. Obviously, the main one was the CDC 6600/6400, and then the Cyber 176 when it came along. The DEC-10 became another one. There was a group over in the engineering building, the Advanced Graphics Lab, run by Marge Knox, and that was another computer that and all sorts of interesting graphics and plotting hardware that they ran over there. All of these, I believe, had pretty much the same policies. You would apply for an account, and if you had an adequate, everything was charged for. The computer time was charged for by, some metric, and the departments would be billed for the computer time that was used. And if you were taking a class, or you were a research assistant or whatever, your sponsor or your professor would have some amount of computer time allocated to him or her, and you could get an account under that. And so all of that was, and in fact, the DEC-20 was pretty much the same thing, except that not just any sponsored use could come to the 20. You had to be one of the projects that had sponsored the 20. Yeah.
Understood.
But the DEC-10 was essentially wide open to anybody on campus, as long as they had the account to pay for it.
Yeah, if you were using it for recreational purposes, you were still being charged for the time.
Yes, you were. Yes, you were. And that was pretty much frowned upon unofficially, but everybody knew what was going on. And as long as people, I mean, it was dirt cheap for one thing.
Right.
Especially time on the DEC-10. You could sit and play DECWAR for 6 hours, and the total amount of your computer time bill would probably be less than $10. So people didn't worry about that too much. I was somewhat involved in the accounting procedures. So in fact, when the DEC-10 first got installed, there were 0 ways to communicate between the DEC-10 and the CDC system. There was no network linking or anything like that. And the first communication that took place was for the purpose of getting the DEC-10 accounting information into the centralized computer account software on the CDC, so that then they could bill everybody. So I was in charge of, collecting all that data. The DEC-10, of course, had accounting software that would keep track of usage, and it was CPU time and connect time. So connect time was how much time you actually you were on a terminal, let's say, and then CPU time, of course. We didn't charge, I don't think, for printer paper or anything like that, but I had to compile all of that data, write it onto a magnetic tape, and send it over to the CDC. That in itself was a challenge. The DEC-10 had 9-track tape drives. The CDC had 7-track tape drives. You couldn't read those tape drives over there until they finally got one 9-track tape drive that I think they upgraded to 9-track or something. And finally, they were able to, and so it was a jury-rigged system. I mean, there was conversion programs on both ends to get the data into one way direction or another. And another legend, and this is probably, other than to a couple of very close friends, I think this is probably the first time that I've ever spoken about this publicly. We did have people who would steal accounts and passwords for the purpose of getting onto the system, and mostly for playing games, because that was, you didn't need to worry about legitimate use. But if you were playing games, your professor might get on you or whatever. And so stealing accounts and passwords was pretty common. And I became aware of somebody who was making it a real career to just, he would steal accounts and passwords by shoulder surfing, if you know that term, right? He would show up, for example, at the public terminal facility at the undergraduate library and just walk by behind people's chairs at the right time, and he could see them type their password and things like that. So he was stealing time, and eventually he was using enough time that it became a bother, and some of the users were complaining. And this was back before the DEC-20. This was when I was, with the 10, and I said, okay, I'm going to catch this guy. But it was not easy to catch this guy because he was dialing in at night. Okay, he was dialing into the MICOM, and from the MICOM he would go to the DEC-10 and he would run DECWAR. Okay, so back then, the phone company was not forthcoming when it came to, well, we had a call at 10:30 at night. Can you tell us where that call was made from? Nope, we can't. It took me literally months of laying the groundwork and establishing relationships with Southwestern Bell, which back then was the company that was Austin's telephone, right? And their offices were on Guadalupe and 18th Street. They had a big office building and central office hardware there on Guadalupe and 18th. And I would go down there and I would meet with Mr. Vance. I remember him clearly. And I would walk in, I say, look, I have a problem. We've got to figure out who's calling in and stealing all this time from us. And, for a while it was, well, it can't be done. No, it's got to be done. I mean, you're building the phones to these people. You've got to have the data somewhere. And eventually he agreed that, okay, he'd try to get me some data, but it wasn't good enough to catch him in the act, because I would get reports of phone calls that had happened 3 weeks before. And so, I never was able to get any kind of real-time reporting done. But I did get a list of phone numbers that he was calling in from. And the really weird part was that all of them were at night, and they were coming from a company that you may recall. It was a financial institution known as Franklin Savings, who was one of the big savings and loans places in Austin at the time. A lot of branches. But these numbers were coming from all these different branches of Franklin Savings at all hours of the day and night of the night. 10 o'clock, midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Security guard?
You got it. Exactly right. He was a security guard working for Franklin Savings. He would be assigned to these different branch offices at different times. And he would spend his time while he was on guard duty there, dialing in and playing DECWAR. Okay. I never confronted him. I got a name. I linked him to his legitimate account that he used on campus for his classes and stuff. And I had even written I wrote a piece of software that was tailor-made to catch him. This software would check the account number we attached it onto the front end of DECWAR. And it was designed to look at the account number that was coming in. And if it was him and only him, it would branch off to this other special account, to this other special program. If it was not him, they would just get put right into DECWAR as usual. But if it was him, a note would appear on his screen that said, we have a brand new version of DECWAR that we're seeking people to test for us. Unfortunately, this requires a hardwired connection. It cannot be done by dial-up. Okay. And so you need to go to a terminal facility to test it out. And then I sat and I waited, monitoring all of the MICOM ports, and I was in Painter, and all of a sudden that account number logs in from a terminal in the undergraduate library. And I run to the undergraduate library, but I didn't know which particular, they had like 100 terminals in there. And I didn't know which one. And I was going back and forth among the rows. And by the time I finally figured out which one it was, there was nobody at that seat. And at that point, I kind of lost enthusiasm because I realized, well, wait a minute, what am I going to do if I actually confront this guy? You know, like, you're stealing time. What, which? Well, so what? You know, whatever. So I was satisfied that I had actually tracked him down.
Yeah.
And, but I never, you know, he never got caught. You know, he never got confronted. And I believe that, you know, all we did was start, you know, assigning new account numbers or new passwords to those accounts so that he could keep them off. But you know, considering the pitiful amount of time he was actually using it, I was obsessed over it. And you know, years later, I remember one of my favorite books came out, and you may know about it, called The Cuckoo's Egg.
Yes, I was thinking of that.
Okay, and I read that book and I said, this is me. This is exactly what I did to catch my hacker. You know, and Cliff Stoll, of course, had much bigger stake. I mean, you know, he was doing the international spies from Germany, and I was dealing with a DECWAR player on campus. But
I was already thinking of this story.
Yeah, all of the stuff he did, he had the same issues trying to get the phone company to cooperate and all of that. That was my story, man, I'll tell you.
This is beautiful. This is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. I mean, that's a classic. We're going to record that. So it sounds like the kind of the official policy was to frown on recreational use, but to accept it as
I think you know, because I mean there were users on campus that were running, you know, theorem proving programs and you know, mathematical simulations and differential equations. I mean, and those are serious programs that will like use hours and hours of CPU time with hundreds of dollars worth of time. And so, you know, the gaming was really minor compared to, I mean, think about one user on DECWAR who is sharing, you know, a slice of, you know, and by the way, the master DECWAR program where all of the serious grinding was doing was a ComCenter account. Okay. And ComCenter by definition didn't pay for anything. I mean, it was just we considered it part of the infrastructure. So the only thing that got charged to users was the IO to their terminal, right? From, you know, it would query the main database showing the status of the universe and send the output to the terminals. And that was minor compared to, and even the main, you know, there wasn't much computing to be done, really, you know. Listen to a user command, update the database. Right.
Text-based adventure, not like serious numerical computing.
Exactly. And I mean, and I was doing serious computing with my dissertation, so I knew what that was like. And my stuff would run for hours trying to, you know, plan a complex blocks world device or something. I mean, This is stuff that can now be done in like a couple of seconds, if that. And back in the 70s, it would take hours of Lisp programming to grind out those solutions. I shake my head when I realize, what baby steps we were taking back then compared to what has happened, nowadays.
Understood. We're I'd say we're in the last third. We're already talking about DECWAR. So what time do we have? We're already getting close to 2 hours. This is
yeah. Well, I'm good, as long as you want to go.
We're like I say, we're getting into the last third here. We're already talking about DECWAR. I would say we can kind of wrap things up in 10-15 minutes. And I think we have topics for the future.
Sure. Yeah, you can digest all of this and come up with some follow-up stuff. But if you send me some follow-up stuff, I can make it my business to do a little bit of research in my files to see if I've got files in my garage with all my Comp Center papers and everything, and I haven't seen them in so long that I don't even know what's there. But I'm sure there's all sorts of tidbits there, like all of the correspondence between me and the Defense Department trying to get the Fort Collins link done and stuff like that.
Okay,
it's probably still there.
Clive, so this is a complete interruption now that this topic has come up.
Yeah,
we're working with Briscoe to archive this type of material. So this is a topic for the future.
Yeah. It's just gonna get eaten by silverfish if it stays in my garage. So if there's any stuff of mine that could be of use, one thing that I have in my garage also is a complete set of the TOPS 20 notebooks, which was the Bible of DEC 20 software. It was a set of like 25 notebooks that had complete documentation on the operating system, all of the applications, everything. And DEC would send out, like quarterly updates to the notebooks, which came in these big packets of paper, and you have to go through and remove pages from the binders and add pages to the binders and so on to keep the thing up to date. And as of when I left there in '84, I wonder do I have the MCC notebooks? No, I think I have the DEC. I must have the DEC 20 notebooks. No, because, well, I don't know. But anyway, I have a full set of notebooks from back in the 80s. And, they take up a lot of space. And I just kept them, but I don't know what I want to do with them. But if anybody wants them, they're there.
Well, we'll leave a note right here for our friend Shannon Costello, the archivist at Briscoe, because she is looking for real material to bring into Briscoe. So we'll leave a note right here. Shannon will be talking to you. All right, let's finish up. Let's finish up with just a quick look at DECWAR.
Yeah.
So my first question was, what was the institutional attitude? I think we've covered that this was accepted as.
Yeah, you have to kind of know or be aware of the environment that existed among the DEC-10 staff, the support staff. We had serious work to do. We had a community of hundreds and hundreds of users all the way across campus, and our main mission was to keep them satisfied with, the DEC-10 computer usage and so on. But all of us were so addicted to this stuff that, a lot of us were there 18 hours a day, if not more. And not all of it was quote unquote work, unquote. So, nobody told me to develop TECO 124. And strictly speaking, at least not until it got popular, it wasn't a necessary piece of DEC-10 software that needed to be debugged or maintained or anything like that. Eventually it became standard, but and so we were doing all sorts of, we would work there, we would play there, and all of us just got along really, really well. And one day, this kid shows up by the name of Bob Heisick, and I looked for him in the roster of Comp Center employees from that era, and he's not there. And someone needs to ask him about that, because I think the only explanation that I have is that he was never really an official Comp Center employee, that he may have been like a work study student, which, wasn't part of the budgeted staff and therefore was not in the list that I was looking at. But he was certainly, he showed up, and he started off as a computer operator, basically, handing out line printer output to people, and worked his way up through user services, helping users and such. And then, was like really good. And he started programming and learning macro 10 and all of these things, TECO, etc. And then, we had a version of Star Trek that had been developed for the CDC that you know about. Rich Cohen, Dave Matusik were big, especially Dave Matusik and Dan Reynolds were the big names there, but Rich Cohen was part of it. And, so everybody would go over to the CDC to play Star Trek. I don't know that it was ever ported to the 10, but it easily could have been, because, it was just Fortran essentially. So anyway, he started, and then, he had this idea of, well, let's make it, like a multi-user thing. And, I remember talking to him about it, and, I told him, look, I don't have time to do this, but if you want to look into it, here's the path that you need to look at. Okay. And I explained to him about the 2-segment programming that took place on the 10. This was a standard memory management technique on all the DEC's time sharing systems. High segment, pure code, only one copy needed, right? And then low segment, data. So all 3 dozen people running the Fortran compiler have one version of the Fortran compiler code, and multiple, each one has his own version of their data and the code that's being generated and so on. I said, you could, given the proper privileges, break into the high segment and use that for a shared database. Now, the problem is that everybody that's running this thing is going to have access to it, and therefore they can step on each other and write over each other, and you're going to have to come up with a locking system that will grant access to only one person at a time, right? And this is just elementary nowadays, right? This is standard database locking, it's second nature to everybody. But back then, the idea of using it for a multiplayer game like this, using a shareable high segment was I had never heard of it before. So, and to Bob's credit, he went out down there and figured it all out and slowly got it running. And, I probably helped him debug any number of things on occasion and so on. I had never messed with a high segment like that. I knew the operating system calls that needed to be used to open it and close it and, lock it and unlock it, but I had no reason to do anything with it at that level. So, this was Bob's project. And then, once he got it working and people started noticing, oh, wow, this is so cool. And, it just grew like gangbusters. And, pretty much everybody on campus that knew about it was playing it. And then it started proliferating to other sites, very much like my TECO 124, people would send a tape and Bob would write a tape with all the DECWAR stuff and include my TECO because you needed it, and off it went.
So it's it's got the same spirit as the MIT AI lab. Did you consciously feel that you were?
Yeah, it was sort of like that. On the one hand, I had my work half that was busy trying to track down hackers that were stealing time, and on the other hand, kind of my ideal, role model of MIT AI. Like, wouldn't it be nice if computers could just be like that everywhere, right? And I should credit that there were probably two other people that helped Bob the most when it came to working on operating system and programming issues. One would have been Tommy Loomis. I bet you that because Tommy was a better programmer than I was by far. I was, I could hold my own, but my strong point was taking other people's code and improving it, i.e. TECO, for example. Whereas Tommy was really good at, starting projects from scratch and getting them organized properly and everything. And I bet you that he helped Bob a lot. And the other guy was Rick Watson, who has unfortunately passed away, but he was another one of our staff members that worked at the DEC-10 at the time. And I bet you those two guys, and you need to talk to, and you need to get Bob's. Bob will know, where he got the most help from. So I would encourage you to talk to him about that.
I hope that we talk to Bob next, or we get an oral history interview with Bob next. Yeah. But Tommy Loomis, I think, is a great idea. Rich Cohen as well, right? Yeah. These are all interviews that need to happen. So
right. Well, so the theme of DECWAR, which was, this was A, Star Trek, and B, the major concepts like the Klingons and the Romulans and all of that. That, I think, was basically, brought over from the CDC Star Trek of Dave Matusik and Dan Reynolds, because a lot of that, the basic structure and pattern of the game was very similar. And of course, the big difference was that you had other people, on your team or the other team or whatever, as opposed to you just playing against the computer single-handedly.
All right. What else do we have here? So some of these questions I had actually, you've of course already addressed. But let's ask about the tape and sending out the tapes. So, we have records that there was a $50 fee to make, and the mailing fee for the tape.
$50? I never heard about that. Actually, no, I take that back. I think my only requirement, as I recall, was they had to send me a tape. Okay. They had to send me the tape, and I would write it and send it back to them. But I didn't charge for postage, and I didn't charge for the actually of the making of the tape.
So this was one of my questions: was who did that? And it sounds like it was you.
Well, I did it for TECO, for sure.
Okay.
And I'm sure that Bob did it for DECWAR. But I would say that the height of the DECWAR distribution took place in 1980, 81, 82. When I had already left the HRC and was busy in Painter with the 20. And so I wasn't as aware as I otherwise would have been about how big that got and, all the money that was rolling in.
All the $50 bills.
I don't know.
All right.
I don't know if Bob had an arrangement with the Comm Center, if they turned that money over to the Comm Center or what. But I guess he must have had to. Who knows?
Well, this is a great place to wind it up, actually, for now. The final questions are about what I call the aftermath. Were you aware at all of how CompuServe took DECWAR?
No, I was not. Years later, I remember just from reading, I was a member of all sorts of the old time DEC-10 and DEC-20, bulletin boards on Usenet, for example. Alt.pdp10 was one of the main ones. And that was mostly MIT centric and Stanford centric stuff. But there was a guy, I think his name was Harris Ryman or Thyman or something like that. Yeah, Harris Newman. He got on and he would get on every so often as I'm really trying to track down DECWAR. And, he was obsessed with it. I mean, he was really trying. And I remember replying to him and I said, you have to find Bob Heisig. And all I remember from Bob Heisig was that he was up in the Midwest somewhere, either Minnesota or Ohio, but nobody had ever, tracked down where he ended up. And if you find him, you'll get what you need, because he was looking for the sources. And but I never pursued it myself. I may have tried to find Bob for him a couple times. I don't think I succeeded. And there were I've had experience even with DEC itself, mind you. Have you ever heard of the snowball language?
Yes.
Okay. So Snowball was developed at Bell Labs.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the researchers at Bell Labs was an adjunct professor at Stevens.
New Jersey.
And, yes, because they were all in New Jersey. And he would come over to the campus once or twice a week to teach a course on compilers or this. And in fact, some of my grad level courses, when I was working on my master's at Stevens, when I took advanced compilers and things like that, were taught by this guy. His name was James Gimple. Okay. And he was involved with Snowball. The main Snowball people were Griswold and Polanski, I think, but Gimple was right in there with them. And he decided once he had learned, and Bell Labs, I think, was purely IBM's domain. But when he got to Stevens and he started, using the DEC-10 and realized what a cool machine that was, he said, okay, I'm going to write a native version of Snowball for the 10.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Snowball was a macro-based language, which means that all you had to do was write the native macros in whatever machine you wanted this to run on. And then the actual Snowball system itself was just a call to all these macros. Okay. But in the end, that was pretty inefficient. And so Gimple decided that he had to do native code for the Snowball on the DEC-10. And the way he did it was really amazing. I would have loved to have been a part of this, but unfortunately I had already left and come to UT. It would have been in about 72, 73 timeframe, where he taught a course on compilers, and all of the members of his class were part of the project to build Snowball for the 10. Mm-hmm. And he basically, when the class started, he had detailed specs of every single subroutine that needed to be written, which essentially were the macros that existed in the past for Snowball. And he handed them out to all the students, and that was their term project, essentially, was to come up with this series of machines. And then he spent another semester integrating them all and debugging them personally and getting them all to run. And he came up with a really, really nice Snowball system for the DEC-10. I knew nothing. I had heard about it, but I didn't know I wasn't there anymore. And Snowball was one of my favorite languages. Well, when the 10 arrived at UT, and I walk into the HRC and I sit down at the terminal and I start exploring this machine that I had so missed for 4 years, what do I see but SIT-ball? SIT ball, Stevens Institute of Technology ball. And I go, wait a minute, what is this doing here? Because I knew that Gimple had reached an agreement with Stevens that, he could do that, develop it, but that Stevens was going to retain the license for that software.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think it was, I think it was one of these freeware licenses, but you couldn't distribute it without permission. You had to have Stevens's permission to distribute it. I don't know if they charged any. I don't think they did. But you definitely needed permission. So I called up one of my buddies at the Stevens Computer Center. I said, "Do you know that DEC is distributing SITBALL?" What? That was a major scandal. And they called DEC and really read them the riot act. And DEC had to make major concessions to them. I don't know what they gave them, probably some big discount on new hardware or whatever. And because there was no way to get that back. I mean, back then all those distribution tapes were out there, and they were out there.
Information
no way
to be free.
Exactly. So that's how SITBALL got onto the DEC-10s, distributed by DEC. And so I don't know anything about CompuServe and DECWAR, but I'm guessing that this was probably a similar story.
So
this was an attractive product that would attract CompuServe customers.
I think that sums it up. That's the core of the story right there. And yeah. My understanding is, and I've looked at what's on what we have today, the letter that came from UT, and there's nothing about commercial usage. Right? It's like,
right. So, for that, and therefore, anybody who wanted it could use it. And so
that's right.
CompuServe, I would have been upset if CompuServe was charging for it. I mean, I suppose they were charging indirectly because customers paid, but, I don't know that they had to pay to use DECWAR, but who knows? Maybe they did.
Well,
anyway.
We talked about the AI lab and Richard Stallman, so things were different back then.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were.
We can explore that. I think we've covered everything and more than I had dreamed of.
Well, I certainly enjoyed it, and it brought back a lot of good memories that I hadn't thought about. And I'm prepared to, elaborate, like I say, revise and extend my remarks, as they say in Congress.
To wrap up this session, is there anything that you can think of that anything that was important that we haven't hit on that you'd like to, and we can come back to it later. I'll check in with you later. So.
Yeah, I think if I went into my files, I will basically make it a project to go into the garage and dig out a bunch of those boxes of files, and I'm sure that will bring back a lot of stories and other memories that probably should be a record on here.
Please do.
And then we can talk to the archivist as well about that.
Yep.
And
take some photos, and we'll share those photos with her. Like give her an idea of just how dangerous this could be for her for her future.
Yeah. Well, the notebooks take up at least five cardboard boxes, and I probably have an equal number of boxes of just my files from that era. So
I'm guessing that anything that was official UT, like your communications with Collins, I guess that was probably NCC, but I would say let's UT adjacent, right?
Yeah. Well, another very good source of information about that somewhere, I'm sure at the History Center, or because I think Rich Denny made reference to this, somewhere there is a complete set of all of the Computation Center newsletters. The newsletters were published on a monthly basis, and it had all of the topical news about, this new computer has arrived. We've got a new version of the CDC operating system that's going to be installed. I mean, everything that you would normally find like on a system B board back then was hard copy, and it was distributed hard copy to all the users and the departments and stuff. So everything from the announcement of the DEC-10 when it was first, installed on campus, to all of the milestones about, up to and including the demise of it when it finally got deinstalled, all of that will be in the newsletter. I would be surprised, but I could believe that maybe DECWAR found a mention in the newsletter at some point or another, even if it was like, please don't hog the computer playing DECWAR. Who knows? But anyway.
Yeah, you're totally right. I've seen mention of
that's
it.
a good source. And
Yeah,
I have a bunch of them,
that.
but not the full. I have a bunch of newsletters, but not the full set.
Well, we'll discuss by email and get an idea of what's there and explore this with Shannon at Briscoe. So, you know, we're picturing doing an exhibit at Briscoe, and what Briscoe likes to show is real historical material. So,
well, one of the things that I'll just close by this, I attended the celebration of life for Bill Bard, who was an assistant director of the Comp Center, and right up there with Charlie Warlick. Well, we should talk about Charlie Warlick, the director of the Comp Center. That's a major figure that definitely deserves mention, because I will mention one thing about Charlie Warlick. As director of the Comp Center, I would like to say that his philosophy kind of trickled down to all of us. And there are organizations that are run in such a way that things like DECWAR would have never been possible. Okay. When I first walked into Charlie Warlick's office, he had a big blackboard going the length of the wall. And on the very top edge of this blackboard, he had a saying. And I copied it down. I was so impressed. And every place that I ever worked after that, including MCC, including AMD and Samsung, every place that I went where I was normally a manager of some IT group or whatever, I would write that saying down on my blackboard, or my whiteboard, as it were. And the saying was this: there they go. I had better run and catch them, for I am their leader. Unbelievably profound, unbelievably inspiring. And I think that is what contributed to the environment that allowed DECWAR to flourish.
Understood.
He was perfectly happy in standing back and watching his troops run the show.
Understood. I'm glad you said this. I haven't learned enough about him, but everything I've seen is admirable. So
yeah. And just to talk back, I went to that celebration of life. I met John Otkin, who is a member of the DECWAR group. And he pointed me to the people who have made replicas of the PDP-10 console, right, with a Raspberry Pi running it. And apparently it can run TOPS 10. And the whole damn thing costs like $275. And I am seriously believing that I'm going to get one of these things.
It can not only run TOPS 10, it can run DECWAR. I've got one sitting right here.
Well, you bought one of these things. Great.
I built it. Yeah, I built it myself right here. Yeah,
you got the kit. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. All right.
The first thing I did when I saw it is I'm going to run DECWAR on that, and I did it.
Go. Oh, excellent. Okay, well that does it. I'm getting one.
All right, Clive.
All right. Well, this was a pleasure, and I hope that it contributes to some sort of record of back the stories and legends of the old days.
Oh, this is fantastic. This is a treasure trove, and I can't thank you enough. And looking forward to talking the next time.
Yeah, we'll be in touch. All right. Well, take care.
You too. Ciao, ciao.
Yeah, bye.